For those who don't know me yet, I'm the fresh face of Space for Shorebirds. This is going to be my first breeding season with the project. So yeah, apologies if I'm not sure who here is new and who's a seasoned veteran yet. But I just want to start by saying thanks to everyone who participated last year. I know that the project really couldn't have done it without your help in all of the stages, from the breeding season, from doing the surveys, helping with fencing, and doing nest and chick watch later on in the season. Yeah, you were brilliant, so a big thanks. The session's probably going to be a bit of a repeat for those who helped last year, but it's always good to have a bit of a refresher before the season starts. And the main aim of this is just to give you an overview of the field skills that you'll need to help spot the signs of ring plover nesting behaviour without causing any disturbance yourself, hopefully, to the ring plovers. This is really important because the sooner we can spot these breeding signs, the more effective any of our protective measures are going to be. So hopefully that's changed slides for you now. Yeah, so I'm not sure what everyone already knows about ring plovers, so I'll start off with just some basic info. Ring plovers are small wading birds that we see in Northumberland all year round, but the numbers do swell in the winter as we get some birds returning from breeding grounds in the far north. But we do also have this resident population that breeds here in the summer too. They breed on sand and shingle and loose pebbles between mid-April and as far as August and September sometimes. This can vary. I think last year the first nest that they had was recorded on the 26th of April, but the last fledglings didn't fledge until the 25th of August, so it's a very long, stretched out season that they have. And the reason for this is they're super tenacious little birds, so if a nest fails for whatever reason, they'll just keep trying again and again, up to 3-4 times. I've had one before in a previous season that tried 5 times in a season. It was absolutely amazing. They're also extremely territorial birds. They can begin to establish these breeding territories as early as February. And I think this year we've already had kind of reports coming in of ring plovers hanging around and checking out good territory. But once these territories have been established, oh, I've just got a poor connection.
I've
hello.
Lost you for a bit there, Ben.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I came up with a pop-up saying I had some poor connection. Hopefully that's it sorted now. So
yeah.
Yeah, where was I? Yeah, so once these breeding territories get established, the birds just won't tolerate any other birds coming near them. They'll chase them away quite aggressively, considering how small they are. In some conditions, they will tolerate other birds quite close to them, such as at the Long Nanny, where the habitat's really suitable for ring plovers as well, but also for the Arctic and the little terns. So there, the ring plovers will nest really close in with the terns, and they do benefit a bit from the kind of added vigilance of the terns looking out for predators. But in general, most of the ring plovers we have, they'll nest kind of sporadically along the coast, and they'll rely on their really good camouflage and the camouflage of the eggs to protect them from predators.
Ah, done it now.
We've just had a late joiner.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Hi, John.
Hello.
Hi. We've only just started, so you haven't missed much, don't worry.
Oh, that's good.
Well, okay. So I put this photo in here just to highlight how amazing the camouflage can be. There is actually a ring plover in the middle of that photo, kind of next to the brown rock there, but they can be incredibly tricky to spot. So yeah, this kind of sporadic nature of their nesting means that they can pop up pretty much anywhere along the coast, which is why we need your help to try and find them. Cool. So unfortunately, ring plover populations in this country and globally really have been suffering quite badly. The last UK-wide study of the breeding population showed that it had declined 53% between 1985 and 2007. And for some reason, there hasn't been any other studies since then. But judging by other counts of like wintering populations and stuff, those declines have just continued until now. So these declines mean that they've been red listed for conservation concern in this country. And also they're part of the Northumberland Coast SSSI designation. And we think that these declines are due to habitat loss, increased disturbance, and predation pressures. So the main aim of these surveys is to help us kind of locate the breeding sites before the nests get laid. And we're going to do this by looking for birds in suitable nesting habitat and checking out their behaviour. Because they'll form their breeding territories a few weeks or so before they lay the eggs, if we can spot the territories early, then we can kind of plan where our fencing and other protective measures are going to go and give that first clutch of eggs the very best chance possible. Because the earlier in the season we can give the birds these protections, the higher the chances of the birds having a successful season. Because the beaches tend to be quieter early in the season before the summer holiday season kicks in, it means that disturbance is going to be lower. So we really do want that first brood to be as successful as possible. Cool. So I'll quickly go through a bit of ring plover ID, just to help you spot them when out in the field. You can see here the pictures on the right are the adults in their summer plumage, and they've got that really.
Sorry,
Pardon?
Ben. I've got the first slide still.
Oh, do you?
Has anybody else just got the first slide?
I've got the ringed plover ID here.
Oh, right. That's
Okay.
really odd.
Have you clicked, Richard? Have you clicked on navigate yourself on the thing?
Right. I'm not syncing to the presenter. Sorry.
Yeah.
My problem.
No problem.
Sorry about that, everybody.
Brill. Yeah, so the pictures on the right there are the adults in their summer plumage with that black neck ring around the neck, and they've got those kind of masks over the eyes as well. That's where they get the name from. And they also have, the adults have got this bright orange bill with the little black tip on the end and orange legs as well. The male and female birds they're very difficult to tell apart actually. They're basically the same, except the markings on the female can be kind of slightly washed out compared to the male. But to be honest, I found that this can be quite variable. You'll have some females which are quite bold compared to others, and some males look a bit drab, so it's really tricky to pick them apart. The fledglings or the juveniles, that's the image on the top left. They've got similar markings, but they're much more faded than the adults. It's not black, it's kind of a beigey brown. And as well, if you get a really good shot of them, they've got kind of distinctive, almost kind of fleck markings on their back, which the adults don't have. And they don't have that bright orange beak. It might go a little bit orange towards the end of the season, but it will never be kind of that bright orange that you get in the adults.
Can I ask when exactly do they start to change the plumage? If one's winter and the other's summer, does it start by the breeding season?
Yeah, it's kind of already starting now. They'll be getting a lot smarter at the moment as they're kind of ramping up for the start of the breeding season. Cool. So yeah, there are a few birds that you might see on the beaches which could be confused with the ring plover. So firstly, we've got little ring plovers. They're closely related, and they do look very similar, but the little ring plovers, they're smaller, obviously, and they're quite elegant looking. They've got those really long legs, they're quite dainty, but they've got this really distinctive yellow ring around the eye, which our common ring plovers don't have. But to be honest, it's very unlikely that you're going to see these little ring plovers on the shore anyway, as they tend to breed inland, and they only come to Northumberland in very small numbers anyway. Most of our other small shorebirds. Oh, sorry, I've got a bit of feedback. Could you guys maybe mute your mics, please, if that's okay? Well, thank you. So yeah, most of our other small shorebirds, they'll leave Northumberland to breed in the high Arctic, but you might get a few non-breeding birds of those species that will stay around, or they might return early if they've failed for whatever reason up north. One of these could be Dunlin, which we've got here in this photo. They could easily be confused with ring plovers. They're kind of a similar size, and they feed in a kind of similar area as well on the shore. However, with the Dunlin, you don't have any of those black neck rings or black facial markings. They're the real giveaway of the ring plovers. And Dunlins have got a much longer bill as well. It's a similar story for sanderlings. Again, similar size, but none of those black rings on the face or the neck. This last one is a summer plumage turnstone. They can be a bit confusing as their markings are more similar to the ring plover. However, they're a lot bigger than ring plovers, and they'll tend to feed in a different habitat as well. They'll be usually on a rocky shore, and also their bill's a different shape as well. If you see it up close, it's almost like a duck bill. It's quite flattened and wide and not orange at all. So some other things to look out for here. Some of the birds you might spot might have colorings on their legs. You might be able to see the bird on the left there, if it's big enough for you. It's got 4 colorings on the bottom of its legs, and we've seen this bird now at Boomer for the past few years. And because of the rings, we're able to find out that this bird was ringed as an adult female in northern Germany. So this is really interesting, and it helps us pick out individual birds and get a better idea of whether it's the same birds that we've got coming back to our shores each year, or whether they're moving around quite a lot. The bird on the right there, it's quite hard to see in the picture, but it does have a different type of ring, and it's a metal BTO ring on its leg. These are trickier to read, to be honest, but they do each have a unique code on it. But yeah, you probably won't be able to read it unless you've got a really good scope on it or something. But just knowing that it's got one of those metal rings is really interesting anyway. So do always report this if you do see it on any of the birds, not just ring plovers.
So can I just ask, as the coloured rings, they're going to be from Europe, do they tend to be from Europe if they've got coloured rings on their legs?
No, there'll be colouring birds from this country as well.
Okay.
And there might even be some colouring going on this year with our project. We might be able to get a few of the birds ringed. But what you're looking for really is the order of the rings. So I think this one was white on top and then green underneath on the right leg, and then red on top and blue underneath on the left leg. And you can then just figure out from that combination, every ringing project's got a unique combination, and you can put it in on this website and they'll get back to you and tell you where it's been seen in the past and all of that. Brilliant. So when you're out conducting your surveys, we're going to be asking you to record any breeding behavior that you see through the Survey 123 app. We'll go through the app in a bit, so don't worry about that right now. But I thought I'd just go through some of the different options on the survey to give you a bit more detail about what you're going to be looking for. So the first one we've got is pair observed in a nesting location. So as I mentioned earlier, these birds breed on sand and shingle or loose pebbles towards the top of the beach, hopefully, so that they're out the reach of high tides. So if you come across any of this habitat in your section, do kind of give it a good look over from a distance, as the birds can be quite well camouflaged, so they can be quite tricky to spot. So just spend a bit of time scanning through that habitat. The birds themselves might not look like they're doing very much if they're there. They might just be standing around or sleeping or kind of feeding. But if you do see a pair of birds in good habitat, it could suggest that they're in their breeding territory, which is a good indicator that they're going to make a nest there. The second one is courtship and display. So in this one, what you're looking for is a pair of ring plovers staying close to each other in their breeding territory. And then they might be making what's called display flights. So they'll be flying close together and calling at the same time. You might even see them mating and stuff like that. So that's obviously a really obvious sign that the birds are going to be nesting in the area. Then the next one is agitated behavior or anxious calls. And to be honest, this can often be one of the easiest ways to know that there's a ring plover in the area. Because they're really camouflaged, you often hear them before you see them. So if you do hear a call, and I tried to get a link on here for one of the calls, but it wasn't working. So yeah, if you don't know what it sounds like, I'd encourage you to just go on YouTube and type in ring plover alarm call. There's loads of good videos on there, but it's a really distinctive kind of one note call. And yeah, so if you do hear one of these calls, just kind of stop and take a few steps back, because they're probably calling because you're a little bit close. So yeah, take a few steps back, give them some space, and then have a good scan of the area, and you'll probably be able to spot them in front of you. This calling behavior can mean that they're kind of defending their territory, if you like, from predators, and can be a really good sign that there might even be a nest in the area already. Cool. Next, we've got nest or scrape construction. So ring plover nests, we call them scrapes because that's basically all they do, is they scratch away a small hollow in the substrate with their bodies. The birds will make a kind of series of dummy scrapes in their territory, which is kind of the birds searching around and testing for where's going to be the best place in their territory to lay their eggs. When they find the spot, they'll lay up to 4 eggs usually, and then that's usually kind of 1 each day for 4 days, and they'll start incubating kind of after the 3rd egg, or maybe once the 4th egg's been laid. And they kind of wait until they've all been laid to make sure that all the chicks are hatching at the same time, because if they started straight away, the eggs would be hatching one day after the other. So if you see a bird sitting, like in this picture here, on the ground, really hunkered down for an extended period of time, then there's a good chance that they'll be incubating the eggs. The male and the female birds will take turns between feeding themselves and incubating. So a really good sign is if you see a bird sat like this, and then the pair comes up and they swap over and the other one sits back down in the same spot, then that's basically almost guaranteed there'll be eggs there. And that can be recorded as a confirmed nest. So if you do see any of this activity going on, it is really important that you don't go up to any of the birds that are potentially sitting on eggs, because this is going to disturb them and it's going to leave the eggs kind of vulnerable to lots of things, to predation, to chilling, to predators. So it's important just to make all of your observations from afar. The last behaviour that we've got in the survey is distraction display. This is when the adult birds are trying to kind of lure away any predators from the nest site, or if they've got chicks, from the chicks. And they do this by making themselves really obvious. Sometimes they do it by pretending that they've got a broken wing, and they'll kind of hold it at a weird angle and call and run away from you on the beach. And that's called broken wing display. And they do that to kind of encourage any predators to go after them in the hope that it's going to be an easy meal. And this then kind of distracts the predator and allows the chicks to either run and hide or to hunker down and freeze and stay still, because they're really camouflaged as well. And then hopefully the predator misses them. And this is, to be honest, the adults do this most often when they have chicks rather than eggs. They might do it if you've got a nest, but this is a really good indicator that actually the eggs have hatched and there's chicks around. So that's a really interesting one to look out for. Cool. So moving on to our nest protection areas. So this year we've got 3 planned nest protection areas. We've got one at Beadnell, one at Buston, and one at Embleton. And we've got these kind of pre-planned because we're pretty confident of where the birds are going to nest at these locations. There will definitely be other nests popping up, like in particular at Lynmouth Beach. We're pretty sure we're going to get nests there. But because it's such a big beach, we need to kind of wait and see where the territories are and the nests are before we put up any fencing, or else we're just going to have to go in and move it when we realize, oh, they've nested 3 meters outside of the fenced area. So that's where the data that you folks are collecting in your surveys is really going to help us target these reactive nest protection areas that we'll be putting up throughout the season. So when we're putting up these protection areas, the fencing that we use, to be honest, it's mainly just to keep people and dogs away from the nest sites rather than predators. It might deter big predators like foxes, but it's not going to stop avian predators, crows, kestrels, or smaller kind of ground predators like stoats or hedgehogs or stuff like that from getting in. It's mainly just to be a kind of visual representation of please don't go here for people. We might also use chick shelters and nest cages. So that's a picture on the bottom right of one of the chick shelters that we use. But But we do have to be really careful with using these because predator species are so smart, in particular things like crows. They can learn to associate these kind of shelters and cages with the presence of plover nests or chicks. And then it just becomes a beacon that they can just head to and know that they're going to get an easy meal. So it can actually end up causing more predation. We just have to be really careful about weighing up the kind of pros and cons in each site as to whether it's going to be useful or not. So yeah, on the survey form that you've got there, we've got some other species that you can note down that you've seen as well, because there's a chance that these other species might be nesting on the beaches as well. The first one, and probably the most common that you might see nesting on the shore, is oyster catchers. They've got very similar breeding habitats to ring plover, in that they just make a scrape on the shore as well and lay their eggs in there, and they're pretty camouflaged. But the adults, they're much bigger, they're much louder, they're much easier to spot with the black and white markings. And because of this, because they're less camouflaged, they tend to be a lot more skittish than the plovers, so you won't be able to get as close to them before they leave the nest and start alarm calling, because they know they stand out more. There's also a slim possibility that we might get terns trying to breed somewhere along the coast outside of, there's two usual spots that they do. One's the Long Nanny and one's on Lindisfarne National Nature Reserve. But in particular, if maybe one of those colonies fails for whatever reason, the birds might move out and try and nest somewhere else. So they might pop up. So the middle one there is Arctic terns, and they can be quite tricky to ID compared to other tern species like common terns or roseate terns. But things to look out for, they've got those really beautiful long streamer-like tail feathers, and their beak is solid red. It doesn't have any black on it, which some of the other tern species do. And on the right here, we've got little terns. They're a bit easier to distinguish because they've got those kind of cute little white foreheads going on and bright yellow beaks, and also they're really small. They're quite distinctive. And these are quite important because these are our second rarest breeding seabirds. And at the moment, all of our Northumberland breeding little terns are focused in those two breeding colonies at the Long Nanny and in Lindisfarne. And in those colonies, because they're so small, they tend to be kind of pushed out of the best nest spots by the bigger species. And that means that they're more vulnerable in those spots to being washed out by tides and stuff. So it would be really amazing if we can kind of encourage little terns to nest at one of our sites that we've got along the coast, just so that we haven't got all of our eggs in two baskets. So that's a really interesting one to keep an eye out. We did have a bit of interest of little terns looking at some of our sites, but I don't think any of them actually laid. So methodology, we've changed it a little bit this year, in that we won't be asking you to keep doing your surveys for as long through the season instead into summer. Instead, we're going to be focusing on those kind of key early months more. So yeah, what we're asking is if you could walk your survey kind of starting in mid-March, walk it once before the start of April, and then walk your survey twice in April, twice in May, and then again once again in June to finish off. This is just kind of a minimum that we're asking for, but if you feel like you want to do more than that, then honestly go for it. The more repeats we have of these surveys, the better the data is going to be, and the better chances of spotting a nest attempt. So yeah, when you're walking those surveys, you're going to be walking along and recording any of the ring plover activity using the Survey 123 app. And that's, I think, the next few slides after this. So we'll go through that in a second. But yeah, it's important that if you do see any birds showing these signs that we went through of breeding activity, and it's kind of outside of any of our nest protection areas that we've already got up, then do let us know straight away. We'll be keeping an eye on the surveys as they kind of come in to us on our map. But if you see something interesting, just send us a message as well, because we'll probably get that first, and we can respond faster and get out there and check it out and maybe set up a fenced area if needed. We've set up a WhatsApp group this year. Hopefully this is going to make it easier to keep in touch with you all, and get these messages going really quickly. But if you can't get WhatsApp for whatever reason and you've seen something really interesting, then just give one of us rangers, me, Richard, or Catherine, a message or a call. Our details, we've got the details at the end of this talk, but they'll also be in the handbook as well. Just gonna have a drink once. So yeah, because ring plovers rely on their amazing camouflage of their eggs and the adults, to be honest, for protection, which you can really see in this photo here. The eggs do just look like little pebbles on the beach. This means that the adult's kind of natural response to danger or a threat is to run off the nest, because this actually makes it harder for a potential predator to spot the nest site. It's more conspicuous if there's a big adult sat on the eggs. But this does mean that ring plovers are really susceptible to disturbance, because if there's lots of people going back and forwards, they'll be up and down, up and down. The eggs will be exposed to the elements quite a lot. So yeah, it's really important that you give the birds enough space, especially if you think there might be a nest in the area. So we usually say about 30 to 40 meters is a good distance. And again, this is probably easier to do when the tide's not high. So if you can time it for a kind of lower tide, that would be great, as then you can stand further down the beach. And also I find that looking up the beach from lower down is a lot easier to spot birds than it is to kind of look along the length of the top of the beach, because you've got lots of debris in the way and stuff. Yeah, but the further away you are from the birds, the more likely they are anyway to kind of behave naturally and be relaxed. So you'll have a better chance of seeing this kind of natural breeding behavior that you're looking for anyway. And it also does just kind of give you peace of mind that there's less of a chance that you're going to accidentally kind of walk through a nest or something like that.
Yeah, that would be awful.
I know, yeah.
Absolutely. I've never get over that.
Yeah. It does happen. I have known rangers in the past accidentally standing on them. It's heartbreaking, but it does just show how hard they are to spot.
Yeah.
Cool. So this is the Survey 123 app. And for those of you who've been with us last year or the year before, you might still have the app downloaded. But if you don't, you can just go onto the App Store for Apple or Android. It works for everything, and download it there. Once you've got it downloaded, we'll send you out an email, and that'll have a link to the survey on it. And what you do then is you open that email on your mobile phone and click on the link. Don't try and click on the link when you're on your computer or your laptop, because it just won't work. It has to be on your mobile phone. You click the link, and that'll then automatically open up the Survey 123 app, and you'll see this first screen here on the left. You then need to click the continue without signing in option there. That's the one that we've circled in yellow. Just ignore the other two. We don't actually need logins for what we're doing on this. Just always click continue without signing in. And that should then take you to this next page on the right. We've got 5 surveys there just because we've got other stuff that we do on this app. But if you follow the link, that bottom survey there that says shore nesting bird survey should pop up on that page for you. And that's the one that you'll be using on your surveys. So when you click on that survey, when you're in the app, you click on the survey, this is what you should see here, these 2 screenshots. So as you're walking along your section and you spot something that you want to record, you go into the app, you open this form, and then you can start filling it out, and you just put your name in, what survey section you're walking, which species you've seen, and then what behavior you've seen. And the benefit of doing it then and there while you're walking your transect is that the little map there, it tracks where you are when you've got the survey open. And that means that it'll put a pin automatically where you are when you've been filling out this form. So we can see exactly where that behavior was on the beach. If you try and do it kind of after the fact when you get home and fill out the form, you'll have to click on the map and move the pin manually to where you think you saw the behavior. Because if you don't do that, then it's just going to show on the map as ring plovers trying to nest in your living room. There's also an option here to add a photo at the end of the form, but really this should only be used if you're trying to kind of give context for where you've seen the behavior. For example, if there's like a big bit of driftwood at the top of the beach that's near where you think the ring plovers are, or there's like a distinctive sand dune or something, kind of take a photo from further back showing that. It's definitely not for trying to take photos of the birds themselves, because with a mobile phone, you're not going to get close enough to the birds to get a good photo without causing disturbance anyway. So yeah, this is the list here of all of the survey sections that we've got. I think previously Mark used to help assign all of these sections, but as we're waiting for the new Mark to come in, we're going to be sorting out who has what sections ourselves. And I think some of last year's volunteers have already said they're happy to stay on with their patch. So if this is the case for you guys, then just let us know. It's also really important to keep going with your surveys, even if maybe on the first 1 or 2 you haven't seen any ring plovers, because you honestly never know when a pair is going to turn up. It might have been pushed off territory somewhere else along the coast. It might have been washed out by tides, and they're trying somewhere else, because they will just keep trying and trying. And even if you end up not getting any ring plovers nesting in that section, that's still really interesting for us to know as well. To have that data saying ring plovers are using this section but not this section is really interesting, and then we can maybe look at why they're not using that section compared to others. So yeah, it's just really important to keep going throughout the season, even if you're not getting loads of birds in your survey. It's also really important that we have that kind of full coverage as well of the whole coast. That's what's so great about this little project that we've got running, is how wide it covers, like Richard was saying before. And this is important so that we're not going to miss any of the ring plover nesting attempts, hopefully. And this year, I think rather than having a lead volunteer, we're going to keep track of when sections are being completed ourselves. So we can see that on the survey app, but if you could also just let us know when you head out by putting a message in the WhatsApp group, then that's going to make that really easy for us as well. Similarly, it's absolutely fine if you're not able to complete one of your surveys. Like, we completely understand. You've got lives as well. But if you could just let us know in advance, then we can sort out someone else to cover it, or one of us can cover it. It just really helps if we know in a decent amount of time. Brilliant. So once the eggs have been laid, it's really all hands on deck to kind of monitor these nests. Both the adults will take turns incubating the eggs. And we need help from volunteers to keep an eye on how the nests are progressing. We'll hopefully have quite a few nests along the whole stretch, fingers crossed. So we want to be able to make sure they're being checked on as often as possible. And some of the responsibilities of these kind of nest checkers would be, first and foremost, really just kind of talking to people that are on the beach about the fact that there's nesting birds there, and asking them just to give them as much space as possible. Because, to be honest, we put the fencing on the beach around the nest areas, it's often got more to do with where it's not going to get washed away by tides than where it would actually not cause disturbance. So letting people know that they just need to keep back from the fences is really important. People sometimes think that because there's a fence there, it's fine for them just to walk up to the edge of it and look in, but that's actually going to cause quite a lot of disturbance as well. Yeah, it could also involve just kind of fixing any fallen fence posts that might have blown down or been washed over, and doing a bit of scarecrowing as well, scaring any predators away, in particular, like crows and corvids that might be trying to get at the eggs. And that's just kind of a big wave or maybe a clap will move them on from the site. Just having that human presence as well is often enough to kind of keep crows away and keep them wary. So that's really important. And then, yeah, when the chicks finally hatch, that's when the chaos really begins. The adults, they'll brood the chicks to help keep them warm or cool, depending on what the weather's doing, particularly when they're really small. And that's what the adult's doing in this photo here. You can just about see she's got one of the small chicks tucked underneath her front there. And straight away, when they hatch, the chicks are what they call precocial. This means that after a couple of hours, they're already going to be up and running around and feeding themselves, which is amazing, but also quite terrifying because it does mean that they can spread out quite far from the parents from a very young age. And the parents then have quite a big job trying to keep track of them all. But the chicks are amazingly responsive to their parents' calls. And the adults are able to get them to kind of do different things, either kind of run to cover or hunker down and freeze, or kind of get them to follow the adults into a new area of the beach, just depending on different calls. And because they are wading birds as well, they do ideally want to be feeding kind of at the water's edge, although it's not essential that they can get down to the water's edge for the chicks to still develop. They can feed at the top of the beach, but the parents will undoubtedly try and lead them down at some point out of the fenced areas into kind of the intertidal zone. And that's when they can be kind of even more vulnerable to dogs and people. But it's quite encouraging to see that because we put out these fenced areas, the parents do see them as a bit of a refuge because they're not having people walking backwards and forwards through that area. They learn that this is quite a quiet space. So if they see someone coming along the beach, they will call the chicks back up into the nest areas, which does help us quite a lot. And And it does go to show that they actually do make a difference for disturbance, because they wouldn't do that otherwise. Yeah, these are just a few photos here of the chicks that we've had hatch on the project previously. The one on the far left there it's a 4-day-old chick that hatched at Embleton, and that's kind of classically responding really well to its parents' call to hunker down and freeze, so that it's really hard to spot, because you can see there the natural camouflage they've got does just make them look like a little pebble, especially from above. They're just a little round stone. The photo in the middle there, that's a week-old chick from Druridge Bay. This one was going for a kind of proper explore down the beach outside of the fenced area, which is a bit terrifying, but you can see it's just a week old, and you can see how alert they are already from such a young age. And then on the right there, this poor thing, this is a chick. And it does just go to show that they don't always get it quite right when it comes to hiding spots, because this one has ran and tried to hunker down, and it hasn't quite realized that it's not blending in very well with the bright green vegetation.
Oh, bless it.
I know, poor thing. But I'm pretty sure it was fine in that instance.
It was. I can confirm it was fine.
Brilliant. Brill. So similarly to the nest monitoring that we're going to be asking for volunteers for, we'll also be doing chick watch. This will be later on in the season when the chicks start to hatch. And because they're so mobile and they're going to be leaving the fenced areas, it's important to have people on site as often as possible, again, to talk to members of the public and let them know how they can keep the chicks safe. So whether that's keeping out of that area with dogs or putting a dog on the lead or stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And on the whole, like, everyone loves chicks. Everyone's pretty much hugely supportive of what we're doing. And speaking to Richard and Catherine, like, you often get people coming back, sometimes like nearly every day, just to check in and see how the chicks are doing. So it can be a really rewarding thing to be part of as well.
Mm-hmm.
We'll be putting these tasks, the nest watch and chick watch, up on Better Impact later on in the season. So do keep an eye out for when they pop up, and you can sign up for them if you want.
I'm not registered on Better Impact yet.
Ah, okay.
I fell between two posts. I was just after Mark left, and the new person hadn't arrived yet.
Brilliant.
So, although I filled out the form and sent it off, I can't actually get on Better Impact.
Okay. Well, yeah, we won't be posting those until a fair bit later in the season for a couple of months. So hopefully that'll all be sorted by then.
I'll follow that up with Teresa as well, Carol.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, there's a form lying around somewhere.
Yeah, thank you.
With a couple of friends who've been told, you get a phone call from somebody in Cumberland to say if I'm okay. Just say yes.
Brilliant. Cool. So, yeah, hopefully after about 23 to 25 days from hatching, we'll get some of the chicks starting to fledge. But it can be quite kind of ambiguous as to when they have actually fledged, because they don't conveniently just, I don't know, turn around and tell you I can fly now. You kind of have to wait till you can see them flying away from something. But around this time, they'll kind of start to make these little test flights. Usually they'll kind of move away from the fenced areas, so they've got more space to practice, and they'll be kind of flying backwards and forwards, testing out their wings and building a bit of strength. Yeah, and it can be really subjective, but we generally say that a chick is fledged when we see it doing a long sustained flight for about 50 meters. And at this point, hopefully, we're pretty confident that it's going to be able to fly away from danger rather than having to rely on kind of running away up the beach. But even after this point, after they've fledged, they will kind of hang around with their parents for a while, because they're still kind of benefiting from the protection they get from the parents looking out for predators as well. But eventually they will kind of move off and fly the nest. And you might see later on in the season, you'll get juveniles turning up that have arrived from other parts of the country, which can be a bit confusing when you're trying to keep track of your own chicks and there's new ones popping up. But yeah, it's all very interesting. Brill. So just finishing up here, we've got a few photos. These are the fledglings as opposed to the chicks. You can see the difference. They're a lot more developed. The first photo on the left, this was actually, I think, a couple of days before one of the chicks fledged, and then on the far right was a couple of days after. This is either the same chick or one of its kind of siblings. It was the same group. But as you can see at this age, they're right down in the intertidal zone at the water's edge. As they get bigger and older, they'll get braver because they're more able to escape from danger. And that means that they will kind of range further along the beach, which can be, again, quite terrifying. But they are, at this age, they are better able to kind of avoid predators. And the chick there in the middle, I think, is one from Druridge Bay. And you can just see here on its beak, it's starting to get a bit of orange coming through. There's a bit of an orange tinge there. And you can also see it's just starting to develop that neck ring and the kind of eye patches. So it's turning into a proper ring plover there. Brill. So that's kind of the end of the online training part of things. Hopefully it's been clear enough, but feel free to ask any and all questions at the end of this. In addition to this training session, we're going to be doing 2 field sessions. I think Richard mentioned it at the start, but one's going to be on the 7th of March at Beadnell and the other's on the 14th of March at Embleton. So feel free to come to either one of those field sessions, or you can come to both as well if you want. They are quite different habitats, so it's quite interesting to see the range of places that ring plovers can breed. So yeah, when we're out there, we'll go over all the ID stuff we've covered today, and the behavioural stuff as well. And you'll be able to hopefully see some of the birds in the flesh too. Get a bit of practice on IDing them. And we'll also go over some of the suitable habitat types. We'll kind of walk along the beach and try and find, oh, this looks like a good ring plover spot. So you get a bit of practice of that too for when you're out on your surveys. Brill. Yeah, thanks so much for coming along today. And yeah, fingers crossed we're going to have another really successful season. Last year was great. We had loads of chicks off. So yeah, fingers crossed this year is going to be just as good. And if going forward throughout the season, if you've got any questions or any worries or want a bit of support with your surveys, just get in touch with us straight away. Details are on this slide here, and they'll be on the handbook that you're going to get. But also just put a message into the WhatsApp group. That could be a really good way to kind of support each other, I think. Yeah, so I'll hand back over to Richard now. And if you've got any questions straight away, then just fire away.